former president going for the Senate seat, his greatest claim to fame was having served on the Harvard Law Review. And we would want serving on the Egerton Law Journal Review to be something that people will call out because it gives them credibility and it makes people know they've been tested and tried. It also connects us and it gives us publicity. Publications actually give us an opportunity to look at what is happening, like the elections. What I was noting this morning is this is probably one of the elections in the post-2010 election era that has been least discussed in fora, etc. I mean, when you think about the 2013 election, if you remember the fallout after the Supreme Court decision and the kinds of things that went on after that, friends didn't speak to each other. I remember then I was dean of a law school hosting an event to talk about that decision, and we were advised not to have it in a closed space. We actually had it in Chancellor's Court, so that if it got too hot, you could get out. And the kinds of things that were said at that convening were painful things, because, you know, it was catharsis for people. People came with a lot of pain. Then we have 2017, and then the two elections. You know, when you think about traumatized people, Kenyans are traumatized. Two elections in 1 year and in a quarter, you know, between August and then in October. And then, of course, people talked about it. I mean, we lived, ate, and drank elections. And then soon after that, there is COVID. And then with all the pain, you know, a lot of the pain from elections is like a festering wound that you put Band-Aid on. You know, if you put Band-Aid on a wound, it doesn't heal. And then we have 2022. And 2022, people don't talk. And you're wondering, is it that the democracy has matured? You know, I don't know. And like Maxwell, who says this is what he does his research on, this is not my area of research. We need to know, why is it that people talk less about elections? Why is it, and you know, everybody says because there was peace, then it means that our democracy has matured. I am not saying it hasn't, but I want us to be a little more questioning about why is it that people don't talk. Elections actually give us an opportunity to talk about many things. Many times we are only talking about technology. You know, sometimes I wonder, why is it that we employ technology when we don't trust it? You know, people trust technology because they won't trust their next neighbor. But technology doesn't work without human intervention. So if you don't trust humans, unless then we have algorithms that run the elections, we all just go, our pictures are taken, maybe we take our irises, and then you say, I'm voting for X, and you walk away, and the machine tabulates. And even then, I can bet you there is somebody who will say, machines don't recognize people from area X, or they are biased about people who have particular genetic makeup or particular height. So in essence, I think we need to see elections as a prism through which we discuss many things. I don't consider myself an expert in elections law. And actually, I probably am also one of the people in this country who's not an expert on the Constitution. Because have you had all lawyers in Kenya are expert constitutional lawyers? I am not. But I have looked at elections through the prism of the things that I look at. For instance, if you look at the post-election violence in 2007-2008, You know, if you just look at it as elections and you don't look underneath, and I remember one of the things that really took me aback, and actually I followed this up in 2013, is the land question. You know, the land question has been in manifestos of political parties for a long time, but it is still an issue. You know, people just keep it. The day it becomes an issue we can use to get X against Y, we will use it. Why don't we resolve the election issue? And I think, as Honorable Ochieng says, when the delimitation of boundaries, you know, the Constitution requires delimitation of boundaries around now, and I think the process is kicking off. That is going to be an issue about land. Delimitation of boundaries is less about elections than it is about determining who belongs where, because you're talking about county X is this one. And I think in the last delimitation, there were a lot of unfinished businesses, which may actually bring out the land issues. All I'm saying is there is fodder for research even as we look at elections. I'd be remiss if I also didn't speak about the other area that I look at, which is the environment. Now we are all talking about, I think as we're speaking now, in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, there is the Conference of Parties on Climate Change. Climate change has affected everybody. And in this country, drought, even though we've always had drought, now we've had the 5th failed rainy season. And that really puts systems under stress. And if they are under stress, people's animals have died, crops have failed. So how does that then, if we have elections within that milieu of failed rains, of dead cows, of failed crops, what does that mean? And in essence, all I'm saying is that we need to begin to think beyond just the confines of the day that we go to vote and the outcome of the election. And I would like to urge us also to begin to look at what do political parties promise us. Because you see, we go and vote because we believe we are going to get X. And it is we scholars who hold those parties to account to deliver what they promised us. So in essence, I would like to urge Egerton to think about even special issues of journals. I mean, just have discussions ongoing all the time so that Follap isn't the only space where we have a discussion and a journal, but we can actually have other journals or other publications discussing topical issues that move our country to the next space. And in essence then, bringing in not just the national, but looking at the regional. What does what we're discussing here imply for the Africa Agenda 2063? What does it imply for the Sustainable Development Goals? We're talking about access to justice, goal, I believe it's goal 16. And we're also talking about partnerships because there is everybody here. Again, goal 17 on the role of partnerships, and that's where we are all coming together. How do we bring all those discourses so that we enrich what we talk about? I'd just like to wish you the very best as you discuss. I will continue to work with the journal and to work with my mentees, grand mentees, and great-grand mentees, because we need to grow a questioning academy in law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Patricia Kamere Mbote. Yeah, and where is Kihali? Kihali, you are my product, so you are great-grand mentee. Yeah? All right. I have a logistical note that has 3 NBs. Let me just read the third one for now. If you haven't registered your participation, please ensure, and it has a full stop at that point. It may sound like a threat, but it's not a threat. Kindly, just see to it that you have registered with us for various reasons. And now then, I'm going to invite Mr. Jafar Mohammed from UNDP Amkeni Kenya, and thereafter he will invite Madam Catherine. And Madam Catherine then will invite Madam Lynn, and perhaps I will give some directions after that. Thank you so much. Tumkaribishe Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Kyoko. It's a very hard act to follow. But again, let me join the list of the mentees of being mentored unknowingly, albeit by Professor Kameri Mbote. I'm privileged to be here today and very happy actually after taking those number of steps towards this. Mheshimiwa Ochieng has highlighted one very important factor, and I hope Betty Okero and the civil society organizations here took note, because one of the things that Mheshimiwa highlighted is the importance of being the conduit between the public space petitions to the August House. And I'm sure we have quite a lot of material that ideally we will want floated in that very honorable House. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me again to adopt the protocols as established by Professor Kameri Mbote as well as Professor Mulwa. And maybe just to add that in one of the forums I attended, when they told me, Jaffa, when you hear distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you should feel acknowledged because of that gray beard that you have. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, please feel acknowledged and happy communications from UNDP for being the partner of choice, really, for this conference and the previous 2 conferences. UNDP Amkeni wa Kenya is a civil society facility that was established in 2008, but has continued to gain traction due to the opportunities that have been availed, for example, by the 2010 Constitution, where the voice of the Mwananchi needed now to be heard a little bit louder than it was previously. And that is where Amkeni wa Kenya has managed to come in through, of course, the support of the European Union and other development partners, to make sure that the voice of civil society is continuously increasing in both capacity and strength. UNDP Amkeni wa Kenya is lucky and privileged to be the vehicle that has supported that capacity strengthening and enhancement over the last couple of years. With this kind of conferences, we get the confirmation or validation, really, of how important the work done by civil society is. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to also invite Catherine, but allow me to correct that a little, just in the same steps of Professor Mulwa. Charity Kagwe is my former immediate boss at the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime before I transited to this new role of being the project manager at Amkeni wa Kenya. So, anaitwa Charity Kagwe. I do not know whether or not there is any family connections with my brother moderator here, because with Professor Mulwa ni mjomba. I don't know whether Charity ni auntie, and in the same line there is somebody called Catherine. But that was a little bit just to digress, but I'm very happy and privileged really to see us getting to this point, because we participated in the blind review that tried to put into context quite a lot of the papers that were submitted to Follap under the leadership of Dr. Aura, which again I'm very happy to work very closely with. One of the most organized people I've ever worked with, and this conference is testimony really to the level of organization that Follap has managed to coordinate. We look forward to this continued partnership and relationship with civil society organizations. And again, allow me to digress a little. There's a friend of mine who says civil society inaanzia kutoka funeral committee all the way to big organizations like Egerton University. And Mkeni wa Kenya, again, is happy and privileged to be the outfit or vehicle that tries to enhance the participation of civil society in quite a lot of spaces. We have quite a number of the grantees that we are supporting in this room today. And allow me kidogo tu niwaulize wasimame tu wainue mkono across the country, those who have been invited by Follap. And we also have other participants who are joining us online. Unfortunately, we'll not be able to see those. But naomba tafadhali tu tuinue mkono the grantees that we are working with under Mkeni wa Kenya. We have a few in the room here today. Daktari, nasema ubarikiwe zaidi. We wish you all the best as you continue to mentor and do the good work that you're doing. And Line, being the representative of the European Union delegation, Santi Sana for that continued partnership and friendship. And of course, Charity Kagwe. And we are looking forward to this continued partnership and friendship that we've been working on together. Allow me, before I leave, Professor Kameri Mbote said the consistency in Follap is what has led us to what we're here today. And I just decided, nikaingia kwa Professor Google kidogo, and he says success isn't always about greatness. It's about consistency. Consistent hard work leads to success, and greatness will come. So we are looking forward to that greatness, and the consistency is already in play. And I thank you all. May God bless you. Yes. And allow me again to invite my former boss, Charity Kagwe, who is with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, a partner that we are working together in the PLEAD project, and she's going to tell us basically what they do on the other side. Asante sana.
Thanks a lot, Jaffa. It's really a privilege to be here before you. Again, I want to just adopt the protocols that have been said here before. Everybody here is distinguished, and it's a pleasure to be here. This is my first time at this particular conference, and it's amazing just to see all of you guys gathered here to discuss this very important event that has happened in Kenya just a few months ago. And I want to just say that friends from across the continent look at Kenya and are they're so awed at the way in which we have moved forward. I have friends from Nigeria who are here during the election time asking, are you guys really having an election? I said, yes, a very highly contested one. And everything was going on normal. But I want to talk to Honorable Ochieng and really thank you for what you have said about the reforms that need to take place at the legislative level. And I know that some quotes have been made, but speaking directly to you, asking, and of course the rest of us here, I'm going to quote Gandhi, who says that you should be the change that you want to see. And it's Honorable Ochieng, you have said such important steps that need to take place when it comes to having a nation that is governed by the people, for the people. Is it by the people, for the people? And what's the other one? Of the people, yes. And before I talk a little bit more about the program for legal empowerment and aid delivery and some of you might wonder how this works, how this moves in, that has been funded by the EU. I want to just note that even as we find ourselves here, I can even say a little bit about what Honorable Ocheng said, that in my childhood, many of us who are around my age know that you could not talk. Even the parents would say, don't talk, you might be heard, you know. It was so it was such a totalitarian era of Kenya. And I go back to just say, let us sit back even as we write our papers and just appreciate where we've come from. The country that we find ourselves is one of the several countries that was a result of partition for Africa. None of us planned to be part of this particular dream that we call Kenya. But together, through many, many steps, we have come to make this dream a reality. And many more steps need to be done. So I want to talk about what the Program for Legal Empowerment and Aid Delivery is and how UNODC, I'm sure many of you wonder what UNODC is about. And Jaffa, maybe you'd have told them a little bit about it. But it's the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And we work with crime prevention and criminal justice. So how we get into this kind of space is that, in particular, with UNODC, we work with the duty bearers. I know civil society is really important, but educated and available duty bearers are also really, really important. So the PLEAD program for the last 5 years has been working with duty bearers. I see on your program a lot is going to be said about SGBV that happens during election time. I can see there's a rapid reference guide that was developed by the ODPP that was supposed to respond to issues that come up during elections. So what we did in the course of the PLEAD program, as somebody earlier here said, elections are not the election day, elections are the whole period. So we've been working with the duty bearers, and our UNDP partners have been working with civil society. We understand just how important it is to have both arms strengthened, and also to have the buy-in of the duty bearers, and to reduce that friction between they feel that civil society is there just to tell them that they've made mistakes or to show their mistakes, but here to come together and say, what can we do better? How can we learn better? So on the path of PLEAD 1, we developed work that, with several institutions, issues that had to do with SGB, increasing the speed in which justice was done through interventions such as active case management, virtual courts. We really were on top of it when it was time of the COVID, and we saw an opportunity to really push that forward. We know how that has helped so many Kenyans to access justice. We really thank the EU for really being flexible and seizing the moment at a very important time of our history. And as we move forward, I know people say we have not talked so much about this particular election. It is, I believe, a sign of maturity, but also I believe an opportunity. And as I see here, so many of you are as academicians, but it needs to go down. Whatever big papers you come up with have to go down to the people. It has to go down to the people who don't speak English, who don't speak in the big languages, the nice words that we use here. But for it to really affect the Kenyans, it has to really relate to the work and the dialogue at the very local level. I look and see from, I think somebody talked about how we progressed as a country from 2007, when the country almost fell apart. And my life prior to this was that I worked at the Tribunal for Rwanda. And that is just an example of just how badly it can go. And a lot of the reasons for the genocide was the vote, just like it was in 2007. It was getting rid of the person who was going to vote against you. And not just in Rwanda, but in so many other countries in Africa, the vote has been a source of death for so many people. But now, the vision that we have had, and the vision that has been had even at the African with the African Union is that it's time, and it's time for us to have an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its people. And you guys have the ability to be those people who make the change that count. So if Honorable Ocheng, I keep talking about you, I don't seem to see him. Oh, okay. I will indeed reach out to him, as we will, and plead to with Jaffa, and find a way in which that particular arm of government should really chart a path as you're walking towards the next election time. I believe elections, you can. I don't know if you think like me, but elections are at a time where everything is strained. Everything that we stood for is strained at that particular time. And it shows who we are as a people, who you are, and what your value systems are. And I believe as we see things evolving, that we have grown and we continue to grow. Plead 2 will continue working with duty bearers under UNODC and with civil society under UNDP. Just noting, of course, the work that is being done by the legal aid office that is also part of the PLEAD program. As we move towards this better delivery of justice to Kenyans, we know that Rome was not built in a day, and so we're going to continue on this path. I really want to thank UNDP for this and the Follap grantee for really working on getting this forum together. I want to wish you all the best in your deliberations, and hoping that this will be something that we continuously talk about, so that when we're in different forums, we're able to push the kind of ideas that are coming from here and make them relevant to the people who we're speaking to. Now it's my great pleasure to invite Line. She's not lying. She's Line. She's really been the program manager for PLEAD, managing the funds that come from the EU, has been a great partner when it comes to really thinking through how the EU is going to support the reform process that is taking place within the country. I always say that it's great to have partners like this, partners who are able to buy into our vision and then help push. I say, be like the midwife. A midwife's work is to help the baby come out. But who does the baby belong to? It belongs to you. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think I need to adjust this a little bit. Can you hear me? I think we just managed to move a little bit, so we're all bright awake here at the panel, but quite a few of you look like you're really looking forward to the lunch. So I suggest before I start speaking, can you just all stand up and shake a little bit and then sit down again? It'll only take a few seconds. You can also just do a little dance around on the spot. Yeah, stretch your arms, shake your legs. It's not healthy for the back to sit down for so long, so. Okay, you're welcome to sit down again. So now I was actually giving you an order. I don't think that belongs in a democracy. You should have decided for yourself whether you wanted to do it. Okay, leaving jokes aside, thank you very much for inviting the European Union to this important conference on a very pertinent, very relevant, and very timely topic in Kenya on elections and legal aspects of the elections that have just happened, but maybe also the electoral experiences and processes in Kenya. Elections is a big animal. It can be difficult and complicated to understand. And I think also in Kenya, you are facing elections where you have 6 different elections on the same day. There's not very many countries who have so many elections in the same day. And I think also this is one of the things where you might see some of the observer missions coming out with recommendations to try to maybe split the national elections from the local elections, because in many countries that's happening. There is, of course, a cost element to that, and knowing that Kenyan elections are some of the most expensive in the world, this is a discussion that needs to take place with all of you within the National Assembly, the Senate, and as the professor also mentioned before, there is a serious drought in Kenya, and maybe the focus right now should be on trying to alleviate suffering and helping people facing some of the livelihoods challenges that the drought has caused. I think I elegantly jumped over all the protocols, but I would like to repeat, as everyone else before me, all protocols observed. I'm very pleased to be here, and it's an honor for me to meet some of those that have really been mentoring a lot of judges, currently still mentoring legal students in Kenya, and also to you, Justice Chemete, we thank you very much for being here on behalf of the judiciary to also talk to us in what is the experiences from inside the judiciary of these elections. As you probably know, the EU sent an election observation mission to Kenya to observe the elections. And a couple of weeks ago, some of the experts and the chief observer was back in Kenya to present the main findings. The report includes a total of 21 recommendations, some of them being quite legal, and 7 of them are priority recommendations. So what I will do today is to maybe talk a little bit about some of the general principles of good governance and how that applies in elections, and then I will just mention to you or share with you some of these key recommendations, because it was not reported so widely in the media, partly because the day that they were presenting their final report to the media, there was also a very important new government appointed in Kenya, which I think attracted more attention, and rightfully it should. So good governance, there are many different definitions, but most of them would say that it includes participation, it includes an element of rule of law, an element of transparency, an element of accountability and responsiveness of those that are in government, some sort of consensus or dialogue orientation, and this brings us back to the appeal to have more discussions and talks about what has happened in the past 6 to 9 months and what is the future having for Kenya. And there's also an element of effectiveness and efficiency, and this of course comes back to what the public sector and the government is delivering to citizens, to private sector, companies, and to the youth, to families, to children of this country. When we look at the elections compared with previous elections, a lot of you have mentioned that they were largely peaceful. There was an absence of physical conflict, and I think also being a woman myself, and women's participation in elections is a big priority for the EU around the world, just as participation of youth and people with disabilities is something we generally promote. We also noticed this absence of physical violence targeting women, and an absence of SGBV, which we were extremely pleased to note. But in the online space, there was a lot of harassment and verbal insults and strong language used, both among different candidates, but a lot of it was really targeting female candidates and their supporters. So this is something that we believe that Kenya should try to address, and it's also something that's included in the priority recommendations from the EU election observation mission. Then the fact that there was a decision to announce results at the polling station level. Having worked on election, this is one of the most important transparency and integrity measures in electoral management, because it allows voters to actually see for themselves what has happened at their constituency, which is what most voters are most interested in and concerned about. But at the same time, it also makes it very difficult to actually do other types of compilations that may not reflect the results at the polling station at other stages in the electoral process. There was also a much stronger coordinated electoral security planning, and maybe this was one of the elements of the elections not being as violent, or that the security forces combined also with working together with civil society, maybe with some of you, but also with the NCIC mechanisms and with IEBC were actually was able to respond very, very quickly and address some of the brewing discontent or violence in a peaceful manner at a very early stage before things developed. Then I think also one of the things that the EU-EUM mission noticed was that the campaigning was much more focused on socio-economic issues, on livelihoods issues, on issues of jobs, on inflation issues, the cost of living, which is a progress in the Kenyan context, because in previous elections a lot of the campaigns has been around ethnic and geographical issues and misrepresentation, advantages and disadvantages from different groups in Kenya. So that is also something that has been noted by most of the international observers. A lot of them have not issued their final reports, but you can see it already in the preliminary statements. Then I think also we should take note that it's the first time that there has been a female deputy presidential candidate. I think this is a very big sign to young girls and women who would like to enter politics that it is actually possible to take part in elections at that level, not only at the county assembly as an appointed member by a party or as an elected member of the Senate or the National Assembly, but also at that very high level. So that was a very big plus, I think. This is probably more my personal reflection. Then in terms of the post-election petitions and complaints, these were mostly, if not all, fielded with the courts, and there are still some processes that are ongoing at the lower level, at the county levels, but for most of these court decisions were issued, they were made public, and they were respected to a very, very large extent, so this is also a big positive. I would also say that the fact that there was for the first time, as far as I know, a catalogue of electoral offences published that judges could use, investigators could use, and that prosecutors could use was quite a positive step towards actually knowing what is, or creating much more awareness about what is actually an electoral offence in this country. Then we saw also very strong coordination at the NCAJ level, both at the national level but also at the county levels, and a strong engagement with the court users committees in many, many counties. And we also saw a lot of joint training efforts. There's been a lot of complaints or criticism that there were not enough funding for civic education and voter education, and I think this holds true that in a country like Kenya that could be much more investment in public dialogue, and it could have started much earlier. One barrier was mentioned earlier was that the late funding to IEBC forced them to focus on some of the things that they are legally obliged to do to actually have the elections happening on the date in August that they were set. So it meant that they did not invest in some of the other things that they were not so strongly obliged to. So all in all, I would also say within the legal sector, because there's also a lot of human rights NGOs and legal aid providers that do engage in civic education and in coordination and training, awareness raising at local level. I do think that I would like to applaud all of you in this room, all your colleagues around the country, for much, much better preparedness within your own sector, and also dialogue and open door discussions with other actors working on the elections. This also goes for coordination with NCIC, with the Office of the Register of Political Parties, and with the NCIC. So I think you should all give yourself a very big clap, because I think this was really well done. So if I go a few minutes to I won't take so long, to the EU-EUM recommendations. One of the priority recommendations, and it should not come as a surprise because it's actually a recommendation that the EU also made after the 2017 election, and that is to make efforts to enact the constitutional affirmative action provisions, particularly the application of the 2/3 gender rule, the application of the principle that 5% of members of elected bodies should be people with disabilities, and that you should have stronger provisions on the inclusion of marginalized ethnic minorities in Kenya. And this is actually based on very important international and regional provisions. So there's references to the CEDAW Convention, the African Human Rights Protocols, and the international, what is it called? The CCPR and ICCPR. Then on the legal side, for some of the judges, but probably, and also for IEBC, there are no deadlines in Kenya for when my phone just did a little hiccup, so I can't find it here. So one of the things is that there are no deadlines for appeals to the High Court against decisions, and this resulted in cases continuing throughout the electoral cycle up until very close to election day. So some of you will remember that IEBC could not print ballot papers for some of the constituencies until very, very late in the process. And this is something that makes it very difficult for IEBC to actually do their work and carry out these tasks before election day and having the materials brought to Kenya and distributed. It also carries additional cost if some of these things are done very last minute. Now, it is not everyone who thinks that there should be deadlines on this. There are a lot of people who think that you should actually be able to take things to court at any point in this process. So this is something where we would also be very interested in many of you experienced lawyers in engaging in the post-election discussions on the reforms. Then you have some restrictions on the right to stand for elections in Kenya. So as some of you may know, there are restrictions on grounds of unsound mind, and persons without a degree are disqualified from standing in certain elections. I don't know the figure. We just had elections in Denmark, where I am from, on 1st of November, but I would probably say that a third of our parliament members do not have a higher education degree, at least not when they were elected to the parliament. I went to university with a couple who entered already politics when they were still studying, and some people are joking, oh, but then they got help to have their master degree thesis finalized, because when you first a national parliamentarian or a minister, you wouldn't have time to write a thesis. So there are many other countries where you don't actually have that sort of restrictions. When we discussed this when the EU-EUM discussed it with some Kenyan interlocutors, there was quite a lot of resistance to removing this. So this, I think, is also something that will carry a lot of, I think the arguments were what, if you had people who were governors or even at local level parts of the MCA, and they were taking important decisions on budgets, you would want them to have a certain knowledge about how to manage budgets. But I think the other side of this coin is that if you're higher educated, if you're a lawyer, if you're an economist, you would also know how to circumvent some of the rules. So, you know, there are arguments that go both ways. The other thing with unsound mind is that this is such a broad category of people. Like, if you suffer from depression, should you really not be able to to vote, for instance. It doesn't mean that you are unsound all the time, but maybe you are in periods or you do not want to participate some years. So this is also something that the EU-UM is encouraging you as Kenyans to discuss. Then the EU-UM thought, it's not me, I should not say we, but the EU-UM thought that IEBC tried to strengthen their communication strategy, but that there is a lot of room for improvements to provide more continuous, comprehensive and prompt information to electoral stakeholders and to undertake regular and structured stakeholder consultation throughout the electoral cycle. One of the criticisms that are in the main body of the report is that the IEBC website, you can actually not find a lot of information. It should be the repository for electoral law, for regulations, rules, for reports on previous elections. A lot of this you can find on ELOC's website, but you can actually not find a lot of the national legal documents and procedures on IEBC's website. So I think also part of this is that IEBC, as you might have noticed, moved very much to social media communication. So there was a lot of information put out on Twitter and on Facebook, but I think there is a recommendation to try to also strengthen some of the information that is on their website, as well as other means. Then there's something on training of electoral staff. I don't think that's super important for you, but you can read all of the recommendations. Then there's also the issue of IEBC to be provided sufficient funds immediately after the end of the current electoral cycle, and throughout the next one to implement continuous voter education activities. So now we're coming back to the civic and voter education. This is also to strengthen the voter registration, in particular of young people, because there was quite a low participation of younger people in these elections. I don't think it's an issue that only concerns Kenya. It's also an issue that is prominent in many other countries. Then there's a recommendation for IEBC to implement improvements in election technology based on regular audits and stakeholder consultations, and to improve consistency and transparency. So what this means is that the report recognized that there were some KIMS issues, but largely also comparing with how voter authentication machines are performing in other elections. They are not major issues. But what is probably missing a little bit more is some better discussions and understanding of how this all works. Although there was some infographics, but I think also much earlier, so people know this and are comfortable. The testing happened very, very late of the systems, and maybe some of the issues could have been improved if the testing had happened earlier. And the other thing is that normally when you have electronic voter authentication machines, you actually audit these regularly, and you should publish the audits, or you make public what are some of the issues and how you try to promote or solve the issues with some of the technical providers that are programming these devices. I have worked in other countries where these devices have been used, not the KIMS kits, but something similar. And this is a normal procedure, but it is not so transparent and open in Kenya. And this also goes with the voter registration efforts. There's a recommendation to enhance the continuous voter registration efforts to target youth, women, and persons with disabilities in order to ensure universal suffrage, and also to consider or to discuss procedures for special voting of election officials, security personnel on duty, homebound and hospitalized voters, as well as nomadic pastoralists to vote, if necessary, in another location than the one that they registered. And this should, of course, be balanced against security measures to avoid multiple voting. But in many other countries, there are measures whereby nomadic population groups can vote, but also that those that are serving, for instance, all the polling staff, if they were not serving in a polling station where they were registered, they could not vote. This you would normally allow in many other countries, the same with other police officers. Then there's a recommendation on strengthening the ban on use of, strengthening the ban on use of public assets in the elections. And there's also a recommendation on putting limit on campaign financing, which I don't think is something new. I think I will end it here because there are a couple of other recommendations on strengthening the definitions of hate speech, for instance, which is something that NCIC is aware, but there are also some other measures where there are some provisions in some other acts that are actually quite restrictive. That means that this could actually have an impact on the freedom of speech. So there's a whole area around hate speech, misinformation, disinformation, where there's a need for further discussions and bringing some of the legal definitions more in line with international standards. So as you could hear, I could talk another couple of hours about this because it's really something I'm quite passionate about. But I would also encourage you, as our professor said earlier, that it is really a matter about you discussing now. There is 5 years or 4.5 years to the next elections. It is going to pass very, very fast. And for many electoral reforms, particularly on campaign financing, or if you wanted to enact the constitutional 2/3 gender rules, it's actually something that needs to be approved within the first couple of years after the election to make sure that that the legal provisions are really in place and that the political parties can adhere to these, because campaign financing is normally not just about what the political parties spend in an election year, but it's also about better audits and regulation of what they can fundraise and making their spendings and budgets much more transparent and open to the public before in any year. So these are some of the things that often go hand in hand. Finally, I would like to thank all the organizers for organizing this very interesting conference. And looking at the program, I'm really sad that I can only be here today because there's some very, very interesting topics coming up and a lot of very interesting papers that have been prepared for this conference. So I would also like to thank everyone who is contributing, not only by being here, but also by developing and preparing papers and presenting them for the first feedback, I would assume, for many of them. So please welcome these papers and give them constructive criticism so that the authors can go back and prepare them for further publication and dissemination in Kenya and beyond. So with this, I would like to thank you, UNDP as the main organizer, and Egerton University, and Follap also for taking this initiative and organizing this third conference, where bringing us all together to discuss this very interesting topic. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Madam Line Aben, Program Manager, PLEAD at the EU delegation. Now, allow me to just signpost on what we are about to do. We shall be hearing from our chief guest, Justice Hilary Chemitei, and thereafter we shall have reflections by persons representing the following organizations. We have Rift Valley branch of the Law Society of Kenya. We have the Kenya Law Reform Commission. We have the IEBC and the National Legal Aid Services, NLAS. And that panel discussion will be moderated by Madam Zainab Ali of UNDP. I don't know whether she is in, with assistance from Dr. Maxwell Miyawa of Egerton University, the man who went to Osgood Law School. Is that how we pronounce it? Is that it? Okay, sawa. But for now, then, allow me to invite Professor Richard Mulwa to come and invite our chief guest, Justice Hilary Chemitei.
Good afternoon again. I stand here to present to you and introduce the chief guest for this forum. This is Justice Hilary Chemitei. Justice Chemitei is the judge of the High Court of Kenya, but also the presiding judge of the High Court of Nakuru. He's here to give his thoughts to this distinguished sitting today. And so, Judge, welcome. Let's welcome him.
Good afternoon. All protocol observed. The protocols are sufficiently long, and I don't want to spend a lot of my saliva. Yani mateyang. It's a privilege to be here, Daktari Aura Sande. Actually, I'm here on behalf of the Honorable Chief Justice, who was meant to be here, but she's away on official duties, and she requested me to come and represent her in this esteemed conference. So I am here wearing the big hat, and I'm also wearing the county Chief Justice of Nakuru, so to speak. I think I wouldn't say much. I've seen the contents of the papers which are going to be presented here. They are very rich, they are very heavy on discussion, and I pray that the few days you'll spend here will come out successfully so that Follap can have something in their next journal, something that will propel us to another level. Those of us who are lawyers, when we went to university, we were taught about searching the law. And there's some very interesting law books we were reading those days. All England Report. The other one was Queen's Bench Division. Professor Mbote, the other one was what? Those funny King's Bench and all those things. Right now it should be King's Bench by virtue of the king. And you see, they go way back to the other centuries, but they are the same products of what we are discussing today. Some of those journals, 100 years from now, somebody will be reading that some fellows presented some papers in this place. So I'm encouraging you to kindly critique, analyze, and have a fruitful discussion over the topics that we have. The role of the judiciary in dissemination of justice cannot be